Hi, everyone, and welcome to our pre-concert talk on this wonderful spring afternoon. I'm so excited about this concert on April 17th as we sort of have a rebirth of spring in the air, and we really see in-person concerts right around the corner. But first, let me welcome our dear friend, Laurie Shulman, our musical guide and my stalwart partner in these talks. Hi, Laurie.
Hi, Gary, and hello out there, everybody. Can't wait to see you all in person again.
Indeed, indeed. We have a very interesting program. I want to tell people why it's called Virtuosity and Sensibility. The virtuosity of each piece will be self-evident, but there's a real country sensibility to all of it, actually, believe it or not, because of the Beethoven, which is just really about nature. It's the Beethoven that we don't always associate with Beethoven, not the Beethoven that shakes his fist at us, but who loves nature, who loves beautiful melodies. It's in many ways Schubertian.
Yes.
And then the Kodai is a very rare piece for Chamber Music Society of Fort Worth, only because it's a solo cello sonata. So we'll get to all of that in a moment. But Laurie, over to you.
And then, of course, we have the Mendelssohn, and he was himself a virtuoso pianist and an excellent violinist, which not everybody knows. But there is virtuosity and also a connection to folk culture, I think, present in all three of these pieces.
Yes.
We open with the Spring Sonata, a piece that I know is very dear to you. And it's one that every violinist studies pretty early on, isn't it?
Well, you know, it's interesting because every violinist studies all the Beethoven sonatas because it's become really the staple of the repertoire, even though I should add that it's piano and violin sonatas. He actually, Beethoven writes with violin accompaniment. So it's
Right.
more like the Mozart sonatas. But the Spring is just such a glorious piece. It has incredible tunes. It has perfect structure. It has some Sturm und Drang. But most importantly, it's beautiful. And I think with the kind of positive attitude we have about the spring season, the spring, we really want to open this concert with the Beethoven Spring Sonata.
It also has a lot of wit, something that we don't always associate with Beethoven, but particularly in the Scherzo Trio to the Spring Sonata, it's very evident that he loved practical jokes and that he loved to make people smile or even laugh out loud. But getting back to the adjective you used in your opening remarks of Schubertian, there are few pieces in all of Beethoven that are replete with glorious melodies like we have in the Spring Sonata.
Exactly.
And the opening phrase is the very best example. Shall we listen?
Absolutely.
What strikes me about this, in addition to the fact that it's so singable, is that it's very pastoral in character. One of the reasons that the sonata was given the subtitle of Spring, but he does something exactly the opposite in his second theme, which is a lot more dramatic and extroverted. It's exactly the opposite of what we've come to associate with what Schumann called a decade or so later a masculine first theme contrasted with a more feminine or quieter second theme. And Beethoven does exactly the opposite. So from the outset, he is confounding our expectations.
Just because it's beautiful doesn't mean it's not Beethoven. And what I mean by that is the structure of Beethoven is really his calling card. And this is just such a perfectly balanced work that you have a little bit of, the drama, and then it's always enveloped in the gorgeous melodies. One of the things that I love about this piece is that even though it's a piano and violin sonata, I think if you didn't know, the parts are quite equal and both instruments enhance each other in
Yes,
all four movements. There's never a moment really where it's all about the piano or it's all about the violin. It's really about the combination of both.
I agree. And I also think that the balance of material is something that is so fundamental to well-written chamber music. It's why we love playing this music and hearing it. In this particular case, you've talked about balance and structure. He uses his second theme to construct most of the development, this second theme that has a lot more dramatic potential. There's plenty of thematic potential in the beautiful, graceful opening music that we just heard. But the development takes ideas in the second theme that have distinctly more drama. He uses piano chords, and then he adds triplets, and he has a series of ascending and descending phrases that form the building blocks for almost the entire development section.
So let's listen.
This is the dedicatee of the Spring Sonata. He is also the dedicatee of its companion piece, the Opus 23 Sonata in A minor. They were written at the same time, but through some errors at the publishing house, they wound up being issued independently, and each one has taken on an independent life of its own. This is very typical of Beethoven at this time. He was fortunate when he first arrived in Vienna from Bonn, his native city, that he was able to cultivate wealthy patrons among the aristocracy from the very beginning. Initially, he made his reputation as a virtuoso pianist, but it soon became apparent that he was a very important voice in composition. And Count Moritz von Fries was one of the noblemen who helped to support him and was given the gift of the dedication as an honorific.
Just looking at the sonata itself, but always fascinated and struck by the simplicity of these melodies. It's just such a wonderful balance. We're looking at my actual part here, and composed 1800 to 1801. And we should remember that by 1803, Beethoven would write the Eroica Symphony, which was going to put the entire musical world on its head, both in terms of length and the kind of chances he would take with the music. So just looking at this, it's kind of amazing how great music can be so simple and yet so profound at the same time.
Yes. Also, something that's going on here is that this flowing lyricism that characterizes this opening theme, and we've already identified as Schubertian, is clearly anticipating the Romantic era, where the emotional pull of the music on the heartstrings becomes something that is of central importance. The emotional appeal of music has been something that's been important for centuries before the Romantic era, of course, but one can sense in this sonata that Beethoven is starting to stretch beyond the confines of traditional high classic style as personified in the mature works of Mozart and particularly Haydn, and he's looking for different ways to express himself.
Absolutely. And I want to remind everybody that this is happy Beethoven. We don't get that much of him, at least in the vernacular, but this is happy Beethoven. And even the dramatic stuff is never really tragic. It's just happy and beautiful.
When we reach the slow movement, we have a very different side of Beethoven. It's a Beethoven that knows how to appeal to the aristocracy in the sense of the galant style, where there's a lot of decoration. In Romantic music, this would manifest itself in the delicate writing in the right hand of Chopin's piano music. But just in the statement of this extremely leisurely lyrical opening theme, what we're going to hear is two back-to-back examples. On the second statement of that theme, we hear how Beethoven embroiders it elaborately on its repetition. You sense the architecture, but he has clothed it, he's embroidered it with a much more delicate lace filigree, if you will.
From a technical standpoint of view, the legato for both instruments is just so essential for this music. I always wonder about, we talk about the older instruments, the forte piano, if you will, but even the piano piano forte, I guess, that Beethoven had, and we were all taught it didn't sustain very well. And yet, when we hear modern versions of the forte piano, it sustains beautifully. It's just not a very muscular instrument. And we're very lucky because Anton Nell has this incredible touch in this concert. And the beautiful Steinway that we get to use over the modern in Fort Worth is a mellow instrument. So in many ways, it's one of the most authentic modern piano renditions of this sonata.
Yes, and you have reminded me of something else that pertains to the slow movement, which is that the initial statement gives the theme to the piano, and the violin is very definitely in a supporting role, doesn't even offer commentary until that second statement, which is much more decorated in the piano part, but the violin's still in a lower register and actually filling in the harmony. Let's listen. Moving on to the scherzo. This is vintage Beethoven with a delightful sense of humor. He just wants to pull your leg and make you giggle a little bit at yourself. He's throwing rhythmic games at you, and he's just got this impish look in his eye, and it's just delightful. Let's listen. We don't really have time for a clip of the trio, but I did want to mention that it just goes like the wind. It's almost going crazy. It's in a frenzy, and it's over in no time at all. This must be about the shortest scherzo trio in all of Beethoven's chamber music.
Yes, but it's also one of the most difficult because it's scales, right? So even though scales are supposedly what we all practice every day, you know, it's very complicated to play them, especially to play them together and play them in tune. It's one of those things where I always think about this piece. If von Fritz was a great amateur, he probably thought that for both piano and violin, this would require quite a bit of work. And
Indeed.
we'll hope that he never told Beethoven that, hey, can you make this easier? Because I just can't afford this kind of time.
With the finale, we are reminded very clearly why this sonata has been subtitled Spring. We're looking at a slide of Vienna in April. Personally, I think that spring in North Texas is equally beautiful, although we may not have architecture to rival what they have. But this finale brings us back firmly to the concept of spring as being appropriate for this sonata, because the theme is, again, elegant, flowing, and vocal in a Schubertian sense.
I would just add that it's also very effortless. It's effortless composition and supposed to sound effortless as a performer.
We move now to the solo cello sonata of the Hungarian composer Zoltán Kodály. It was the second cello sonata he had written. The first one, from much earlier in his career, is for cello and piano. But with this one, he really went to town to exploit the full resources of the cello, which of all the members of the string family, arguably has the widest range. And he started by tuning down the two lowest strings of the cello in a technique that traces back to Baroque times, but had not been used very much in the 20th century. It's called scordatura. Gary, as a string player, would you please explain to us what scordatura means, how it affects the timbre of the cello or of a violin, and why it is important for this piece?
Yes, scordatura has been used since the Baroque times, as you had mentioned. It tunes down, in this case, two strings, a half step. And the reason for that is because it not only gives an extra range to the instrument, but it also gives a very different timbre to it. In some ways, it loosens up the instrument, so it sounds possibly even more like a mandolin rather than a cello. It's a very interesting effect. And this entire sonata, between the ranges of where he scores it, between the left-hand pizzicato, between the incredible fleeting passage work, it may be certainly for Opus 8 the most virtuosic and the most challenging work written for the cello until the 21st century. It's an incredible work. I think the audience will really enjoy it.
It's worth pointing out that while Kodai was an accomplished pianist, violinist, and violist, of all the string instruments, he was most proficient on the cello. And it really shows that he wanted to exploit the cello's full resources. This is just an explosion of a piece, which we can hear right from the very opening. And then let's listen to that, and then we'll discuss it. So what we had here is something called quadruple stops, which means that the cellist must draw the bow across all 4 of the strings. It's a blaze of passion. This thing just radiates powers. It's what I call a take no prisoners opening. He is letting you know that the cello is boss here, and he is going to change your image of what a cello can do sonically.
I wanted to also mention the stamp that we saw here before. When he was recording the folk music, it was incredible production to record something in the early 20th century. The kind of equipment you would have to use to bring it with you, electrical wires. His commitment to Hungarian music, the folk music of Hungary, is incredible. And I think you can really hear it in this work. You mentioned Bartók before. I think both of them were incredible champions of Hungarian folk music, and we hear it in the sonata.
They are also widely credited, the 2 of them, with having founded the science of ethnomusicology, which is historical research into traditions that have not traditionally been at the forefront of high culture, but rather looking to oral traditions that might not ever have been written down previously, but would have been passed on through song, through dance, through more primitive instruments by cultures that were remote from large cities. Kodai was extremely important in the evolution of our knowledge of Central European folk music. And we will hear some of that a little bit later in the sonata. It's an enormous work. It takes almost a half an hour in performance with 3 very substantial movements. We've already heard the beginning of the first movement. The second example we've got for you alternates 2 techniques called arco and sul ponticello. Would you please explain those, Gary?
So arco, simply put, is just playing with the bow, normal. But sul ponticello is a very interesting effect. I'd mentioned the scordature and then the left hand pizzicato. Sul ponticello is played almost directly at the bridge. And the reason for that is because you're getting a completely different tone without changing the pitch at all. It's more of a, I would say, laser-like, sort of a steely. It sounds rather ghostly, I would say.
I agree. And in the example we're about to hear, you'll notice that the arco pitches are in one register of the cello, and the sul ponticello, it's almost like it's on a different planet. It sounds like it's at the complete other end of the spectrum sonically. Let's listen. But that is only the beginning of the extended techniques that Kodai is determined to use in this piece. I have another example that I've chosen, which shows him using trills over the entire register, the entire tessitura possible of the cello, including trills with double stops and wide leaps from the lowest register to the highest register. May we hear it, please? Let's move now to the slow movement, which he's marked adagio with great expression. This is an intimate and mournful and soulful music that is, I think, diving into the heart of the composer's soul and arguably the heart of the cellist's soul. Let's listen and then we'll talk about what's going on in this clip. What we've heard here showed the melody on the top with left-hand pizzicato accompaniment below. It practically feels like two instruments, and it's almost as if he were treating the cello as a keyboard instrument, at least in terms of its range.
Agreed. And also, I think it has quite a character of a cimbalom, which is a traditional Hungarian instrument.
It's a hammered dulcimer, the cimbalom, and it is frequent in gypsy bands and in rural areas of Hungarian music.
Exactly. So in some ways, it's like Kodai is exploring how do you treat the cello in such a way that we will forget that it's a cello, and we will think of all of the folk instruments that are not in front of us, and yet he pays homage to them.
Yeah. The overall structure of this slow movement is an extended ternary form, and its middle section is a little bit more animated. It's essentially a free fantasy on folk song phrases that were probably used in 17th and 18th century military units in Hungary. That is where we believe that he got some of his source material. Moving on to the third movement, this is where you really get the sense that he is in a frenzy of folk dancing. It's hard-edged, it's mysterious, it's got this thrumming rhythmic pulse right from the beginning. Let's listen and then we'll talk about it. Here is elements of folk fiddling and bagpiping, both things that he would have encountered in these rural areas, but he has somehow managed to transfer them all to the cello in a way that sometimes sounds like the cello has multiplied like those buckets of water when Mickey is in Fantasia trying to get the best of things in The Sorcerer's Apprentice. The cello just goes crazy, and there's also elements of perpetual motion.
Remember that this instrument was not the solo instrument we know it to be today. I mean, really, it took Victor Herbert and Dvorak in the late 19th century, but I really think Kodai with this Opus 8 catapulted the cello into a completely different category, and this last movement really lets it shine.
When he goes into the perpetual motion, that is our last example for the Kodai, what we have is a preservation of these driven dance rhythms in a very high register now, and you have this feeling that the instrument could practically explode because it's been boiled over. It's almost like it's spinning out of control, and yet it's a remarkable tour de force on the part of the player. When Mendelssohn was composing, the most popular form of chamber music was the piano trio. Some of his contemporaries wrote a dozen or more piano trios. We only got 2 from him, but they're both masterpieces. And we hear the second of them, the C minor trio, which is significantly later than the more popular and more frequently performed D minor trio. The first movement has a really stormy first theme that I think is cut from the same bolt of cloth as his Hebrides overture, which is arguably the greatest concert overture of the entire 19th century. Brahms said he would have given everything he'd written to have composed the Hebrides overture. And here Mendelssohn captures its spirit in the theme for this piano trio. Let's listen. going on here is the piano is in octaves and it's setting forth the melody. And if you listen carefully, you heard that the strings are just sustaining pitches underneath it. But because Mendelssohn knows how to share his material, he then gives the theme to the strings and he has the piano shift to the subsidiary role, now punctuating what they're doing in rhythmic chords that add a little bit to the agitation, generating a steady crescendo through everything that we just heard so that he builds very quickly to his first climax.
This work for me has so many incredible chorales that the drones that you spoke about in the strings in the very opening is kind of almost a preamble for what we will talk about in the last movement, because
Right.
Mendelssohn just wrote incredible chorales that seem so natural for a turbulent, dark trio.
Slow movement. I don't think we have time to listen to it, but I'll just tip my hand that its main theme bears a startling resemblance to the beloved Irish tune, Danny Boy. Mendelssohn was probably the greatest composer of scherzi of the 19th century. He knew how to make them fleet and light and witty and gossamer. The most famous one is probably the overture to A Midsummer Night's Dream from his incidental music. And I am reminded very much in the way he treats the strings in the opening of this scherzo. Let's listen. Okay, Gary, what's it like playing this as opposed to playing violin part in the overture to A Midsummer Night's Dream, or for that matter, the scherzo to the Mendelssohn Octet?
A 16-year-old Mendelssohn set the bar for everyone and himself so high by writing that incredible scherzo for the octet that I would say everything that followed him, it had to be at the level, otherwise it would be a drop off in his talent. I would say that it's actually very liberating to play these scherzos as opposed to playing an orchestra, simply because it's one to a part. And even when you play together with the cello and with the piano, when you have three people, it's the kind of intimacy that you can really let it go. And what I love about this trio, much like the D minor trio actually, is that you really can relax and make music and you can take chances. I think you hear that also in our performance because we've played it together several times. And this piano, it's just such a mellow and yet responsive instrument that all the string instruments and the piano can work together as one. It's really fun to play.
At the same time, all three parts are extraordinarily difficult, very, very demanding, and the keyboard work is nothing short of concerto-like. So with the finale, it's a culmination of this wonderful trio. He opens with a theme that is restless and it doesn't want to settle in one key. We are back in the home tonality of C minor, but he's surging, it's going in waves, it's pulling you this way and that way. It's very romantic in its contours. Let's hear it, please. Now, there are three principal themes in the finale, but we just heard the first one. The most important by far is a chorale that everyone in Mendelssohn's audience would have known because it is extremely close to a Lutheran chorale. It's not the same as the Lutheran chorale, but you will know immediately when you hear the chorale tune, and he milks it for all that is worth in this finale. Let's listen to a little clip. So he's letting us know that after this dark piece that hinted at all this grim C minor stuff, he's definitely going to let us resolve this trio in major mode. And it's the chorale that allows him to do that. Mendelssohn definitely knew his Lutheran chorales and made use of them in a number of pieces. This is one of the finest examples.
Laurie, do you think it's due to the part that he discovered Bach in Leipzig, the city of Bach, that he used so many of these chorales?
I think there's no question about that because Bach was the consummate user of all chorale tunes and brought them to new and greater heights through his organ music as well as his choral music. And it's one of my favorite pieces, this C minor trio of Mendelssohn's chamber music, and I think it just makes a splendid close to this afternoon's program.
We look forward to seeing our audience in person in the fall. And meanwhile, remember that we have one more concert coming up in May, which means that I get to do this again with you to talk about the May concert, Laurie. So we will look forward to doing this and kind of close out our spring season with a bang.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gary, and enjoy the performance, everyone.
Thank you.